Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. Your host with the moster is me, Dusty O'Connell, and I am joined, as per usual, by Vikings blogger extraordinaire, writer for ColdOmaha.com, 1500ESPN.com. I called it ESPN 1500 last time. I don't know why I did that. It's actually 1500ESPN.com, and occasionally Daily Norseman, and pretty much every other website that's worth reading. Useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Good, man. How are you?
Well, better now. If you have never had a migraine headache, consider yourself very lucky. Because I received a visit from the migraine fairy, as I do a couple times a year.
I imagine the migraine fairy felt freed up after having dealt with Percy Harvin for so long.
Oh my gosh. He's probably got a lot of space on his schedule clear to harass and annoy others.
Specifically you.
Specifically me this time. So, I apologize if there is an increased number of malapropisms and mistaken names in this episode. That's the sort of thing that happens in what is known as the postdrome, or the period after a migraine when you're still not fully right. So, didn't know that was a thing.
So you're sobering up, essentially.
I have a migraine hangover, basically. It's about where I'm at. However, I am grateful to report that we did not lose a game to the second worst team in football, if you believe that the 49ers are the third. And we will have a recap of the win over the Jaguars for you after we go over a little bit of Vikings news this week. But first, I wanted to take a moment to thank several of our listeners who have heard the cry, who have answered the call, so to speak, and become contributing members of the Norse Code community. Of course, a tip of the cap to everyone who is already a member of this illustrious community. But joining us this week, a $1 a month contribution via Patreon from Rahul Abhyankar. He includes a note, I live in Dallas for work, because nobody apparently lives in Dallas for pleasure, and listening to local sports radio on my daily commute is unbearable. Dak, Zeke. I can't take it. Thank you for commiserating with me every week. I enjoy your podcast so much and am happy to contribute. Well, thank you so much, Rahul. We are grateful to have you as a member of the community, and we promise to limit the Dak and Zeke to an appropriate amount for a fan of the Vikings.
Let's talk a little bit about Dallas before we get to the next four, which, by the way, there are four. Thank you so much, guys. Have you been to Dallas?
I have not. Actually, the co-founder of my little private party bartending company is from Fort Worth, and so I have heard tell, and he is very grateful. He speaks almost every week about how grateful he is to be away from DFW.
The thing that gets me the most, and it's not by any means the worst thing about Dallas by far, it's like probably not even on the list of the top 10. It could be, is the lack of zoning laws. And I didn't realize how much that mattered to me because it didn't think it would. But like as you drive through the city, you like go through what is ostensibly a residential neighborhood, and in the middle of it, there's like a strip club, and you're like, what does this do? What? And then you just keep going, and then there's like a gun store, and then there's just like a random bar, and there's just like houses in between, and it's just like weird. And then there's like a school next to a porn shop, which I'm sure has very, very strict standards for what constitutes legal identity. It just threw me off so much I didn't think it would throw me off.
That doesn't sound. Is that why I call it a metroplex? Because it isn't really like a city in any like customarily defined sense of the word.
Maybe. I don't know. I think the last time I mentioned this, and I may have mentioned this on this podcast or another podcast, or I just said it to somebody. But the last time I mentioned this, somebody was like, yeah, they're going to fix that, or they're fixing it now. But I just can't help but think that all of those oddities will be grandfathered in because it would just be way too insane to all those businesses to be like, yeah, well, we want to make the city good, so you have to be gone now.
Well, and, at least one of those guys that has, like, a strip club between a school and a gun store has some kind of, like, local political clout or is a politician himself and
right.
would strenuously, like... Because I know there's There's one like fully nude strip club in Denver, but it's technically not in Denver because that would be illegal. So instead, a city that is completely surrounded by the city of Denver called Glendale sprung up. And wouldn't you know it, the mayor of Glendale is also the owner of Shotgun Willie's. It is functionally a political distinction to enable him to offer, I guess, fully nude dancers functionally within the confines of the city of Denver. Like, you pass through Glendale without even realizing that you've, like, entered a different municipality. Although, one bonus to Mike Donovan's, I guess, libertarian haven is that it's the only Target in the Denver area, the greater Denver area, where you can buy, like, full-strength alcohol. Like, there's a liquor store inside a Target, which I've never seen.
Right. See, deregulation definitely has its benefits. By the way, before we get back to the rest of the donations, I do want to mention, once again, for maybe the 6th time on this podcast, that Mankato has one strip club because the city of Mankato banned strip clubs, but that one got grandfathered in, so it gets tons of business during training camp. All right, moving on.
So that would be a good spot for some Viking sightings during training, or perhaps some journalist sightings, or both during training camp. Or both. Why not Zoidberg? Joining the Norris Code donor community this week, also, 4 people via PayPal have heard our call for your precious dollars, it being the holiday season and all that. Travis Yanta contributes $5 via the PayPal. Thank you, Travis. Matthew Farron contributes $20. Thank you, Matthew. That pays for a significant chunk of 1 month's bandwidth. So all the thousands of people who listen to the show for the rest of December and a good chunk of January, just keep in mind, thanks, Matthew Farron. You made this possible. Ryan Alessio contributes $10 via PayPal, another significant chunk of the bandwidth costs for this show. And James Blackwood contributes $5 via PayPal. Thank you, James. So these 4 gentlemen are kindly ensuring that Norse Code will continue to survive the airwaves for at least until the regular season ends. And just like Adrian Peterson, depending on when we exit the regular season, all bets are off. So I guess speaking of Adrian Peterson, he will be returning to practice this week, designated for return from injured reserve. Mm-hmm. Presumably, his claim that he doesn't want to play unless the Vikings make the playoffs is still in play. What? How likely is that? Like, if he's ready to play, he's going to be there, won't he?
Yeah, I think he just says stuff sometimes. I don't know. We were talking about this on the other podcast that I'm on, and we were like, is it shitty to say that? And we were like, well, if you're in the locker room, I think it really depends on your opinion of him as a person. Like, if you're friends with him, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. He doesn't want to waste his time. But if you're not, you're just like, man, I've been busting my butt for 16 games, maybe 14, and it ended up being a lost season by, like, the thinnest of margins. And this dude couldn't even get himself to play because he said he wasn't going to play in the playoffs. I don't know. But it is Adrian, and he just says stuff. And it's, like, really difficult to interpret the guy because he just says stuff. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, he'll not mean a lot of things because he doesn't know, like, how to really use the English language to its fullest extent, which is not a huge criticism of him. That's not his job. But it also does make it difficult to, like, interpret him,
He's inscrutable by default and not necessarily by design.
Exactly.
According to an article by Christopher Gates at the Daily Norseman, the timetable appears to be Peterson returning for the Week 16 matchup, which would not be the playoffs for those who are counting. Coming back after 1.5 games where he had 31 carries for 50 yards, he seems like he would be a perfectly adequate replacement for Matt Asiata.
He might be. One thing to note is that despite how poor the running game has been under Asiata and McKinnon, and just in general, probably the offensive line, because it is unlikely that, like, 3 separate running backs would average under 3 yards a carry without it being the fault of the offensive line. I believe, and I'm double checking as I'm saying this, but I believe Matt Asiata this year has a better yards per carry out of shotgun than Adrian Peterson has yards per carry out of shotgun. So I'm checking real quick. So Matt Asiata's yards per carry out of shotgun this year, which is a depressed year, is 4.1. Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't even have to fact check this. Adrian Peterson certainly is worse. But, in the interest of having like an ethical podcast.
Well, I'm glad we were able to verify that so quickly.
Yeah, so 4.1 for Matt Asiata out of shotgun. Adrian Peterson out of shotgun. 3.8.
3.0. Okay, so better than I thought, but still not as good as the great Matt Asiata.
Right, and Peterson's like 2015 out of shotgun, I think, is like that's the one people have been talking about a lot. That one's 1.6.
Not as good.
Not as good. Which 1.6 yards per carry, by the way, is his 2016 yards per carry. It's all coming together.
Wow. Wait, 2016?
Yeah, those 50 yards on however many snaps.
Oh, yes. That is. Well, we can. Luckily, he will be able to probably, maybe double his 31 carries in Week 16.
It's true.
So Adrian, not dead. Also not dead, Harrison Smith may return to play safety for, who would he switch out with? Mackenzie Alexander, is that right?
No. Anthony Harris.
Oh, Anthony Harris, yes. Who was not a giant factor in the Jags game, but that's more on the Jaguars than it is on Ant Harris.
Yeah, there is one instance where he had a big impact, but it was negative. I thought this play was on Andrew Sendejo, and I still to some extent believe that Sendejo messed up, but Mike Zimmer said that the touchdown was on Anthony Harris. When you watch it, you can kind of see why. Harris didn't bail quickly enough. It looks like it was supposed to be cover 4 or cover 6 with Xavier Rhodes in man coverage, one of the two, and which meant that Anthony Harris was supposed to go up into the end zone to prevent what happened from happening. It was a post that split the safeties, or would have split the safeties had that second safety been up there. So Brian Walters, who is a player, who has definitely played in the National Football League before, scored a touchdown. I think he was on the Seahawks and the Texans. I don't know, man. This guy is just like, he's just like some white guy that no one ever pays attention to, and he does like a bunch of special team stuff. Like he fits the stereotype pretty well, which is kind of unfortunate for him. But he scored because of Anthony Harris.
So it'll be good to have Harry Smith back against a team that actually has like a competent offense next week.
Well, yeah, and in particular against a team that has some really good receivers.
Indeed. Unfortunately, though, Sharif Floyd dead, and not actually like physically dead, but out for the season. He will spend the remainder of 2016 on injured reserve.
Right. So we heard tell of 2 players coming back from death or just not being dead in the first place. In return, we hear about a player who has been dead for a long time being officially declared dead.
So we'll see him next year, perhaps.
Hopefully, well, because he's got the 5th year option on him, and that doesn't get guaranteed until March at the beginning of the league year. So the Vikings could attempt to renegotiate his contract, or they could cut him. It's not like the Matt Asiata situation, or not Matt Asiata, Matt Khalil situation, where Khalil had an $11.5 million guarantee because Khalil was picked in the top 10, which means he gets his 5th year option is identical to the franchise tag for players at his position, which is unsurprisingly like very high. But for someone like Sharif Floyd, it's just kind of like slotted where he is. So it's not going to be as expensive, but we'll see kind of what happens with him.
Something else we will see in 2017 is the Vikings with their cleats in Twickenham Stadium playing the Cleveland Browns in London.
Yeah, I wrote in my story briefly covering this in Cold Omaha that Twickenham is believed to be by the NFL a much better surface to play football on because, of course, it was a rugby-only stadium. In fact, the only sport that is not rugby that's been played there And they've played both rugby union and rugby league, although significantly more rugby union because I think it's officially a rugby union stadium with an odd rugby league game being played there. Is football, is American football. They've never played any other sport. They haven't played like polo or soccer or what other hurling. That's not really English, it's Irish. But, they haven't played any other sport there. So the NFL believes it's a much better pitch for playing American football on. I do remember some people complaining about the turf during the game, and then I looked up on the internet to see if there were any post-game game complaints about the turf, and there weren't. There have been a bunch of complaints about the Wembley turf. That makes a lot of sense because the turf is designed to handle 180-pound soccer players. Rugby union players will vary from like 200 to 250 pounds. I know some people have said 280 pounds. That might be true. For me, I looked up the weight of who I assumed were going to be the heaviest rugby union players, and people who follow rugby, please feel free to correct me. But I think they're the forwards, and I looked up just a couple of the English national team's players, and they're like 250 pounds. So maybe they get up to 280 pounds. That's great. But given that there's about 8 players on an American football team that are 300 plus pounds, and then the rest are like less than 280 pounds, that's probably a good thing. So my guess is that Twickenham will be the stadium of choice for the NFL going forward if it continues to play out well. Also, it's the Browns, so you get basically 2 bye weeks in a row.
Ha! Zing! Why do we make all these poor people in London watch just like awful games like this? Like, why is it always the Jaguars and the Browns, who are actually the 2 worst teams in the league?
I don't know. The thing is, we're giving Mexico City all these good games. Like it's the Patriots and the Raiders next year.
Wow.
Like, that's an amazing game.
So are they going to have an alternate stadium because the turf at Azteca was like completely destroyed?
It was awful, wasn't it? No, they're not going to have a different stadium.
Oh.
Are you kidding me? That stadium seats like 150,000 people.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it was what, like 2/3 full? Which is still like fine, but
it's more than most NFL stadiums. 2/3 of Azteca is more than most NFL stadiums.
Well, maybe they can get a decent pitch.
Maybe. I'm sure they'll look into it.
Beef it up somehow.
Yeah, I said look into it. I don't know if they'll do anything about it, but they'll think about it.
Shrug emoji is the only line in the report.
Hey, maybe they could get some turf mailed to them by the New Orleans Saints. That was the problem in the Hall of Fame game, right?
What, really?
Yeah, no, they had so the Saints have like this some year rotation. I want to say 7-year rotation. That seems kind of long, but whatever. They have some year rotation for their turf, and they just finished their rotation, so they sent it up to Canton for the Hall of Fame game, just right before it was going to get retired and destroyed or whatever. And
then the turf retired itself early?
Yeah, yeah. And so if people remember the Hall of Fame game, they canceled it, right?
Yeah, they canceled it.
Yeah. I don't know if they delayed it or what, but they canceled it because did it melt? Something. Oh yeah, because they couldn't handle the cold, and they tried to unfreeze it, and the process of unfreezing melted everything, and so now you can't stick your cleats in it because it hardened up. Anyway, hopefully that happens.
Why we got to a point where we're transporting turf around the country for a Hall of Fame game, I will never understand. But hopefully, like J.K. Simmons in Burn After Reading. Well, I guess we learned not to do it again. Well, damned if I know what we did. So we had Uncle Chaps on last week to talk Jaguars, and
he's one of my favorite episodes. Actually, he's great.
Oh, it was so fun, and he, of course, is down on the Jags, as any realistic Jags fan is, and they performed. I guess about as one would expect. We came out on the offense firing. First play of the game was the longest pass of the game, I think, 44 yards to Kyle Rudolph.
There was one longer pass, because I think there were 3 passes, 55, 48, and 45, something like that.
Okay, so the 45 was just the longest that Rudolph had caught to that point this season.
Yes.
And drive starts hot, stalls out, field goal. Same thing with then Jacksonville goes 3 and out, and then we score again. I was watching the replay, and is it just me, or is Jerick McKinnon more athletic than we initially thought he was? It seemed like, I mean, maybe Jacksonville is just like god awful at tackling, but it seems like he was really generating.
I think he displayed more athleticism in this game, independent of the Jaguars, than he has in some other games. But he is performing as athletically as I anticipated he would when the Vikings drafted him. If that relative set of expectations to make comparisons to make sense. I think he's playing more athletically in that game than he had for most of the season. But that's kind of who I had hoped he was always going to be.
Well, yeah, I remember you talking when we, initially picked him up about the potential for yards after contact. And, we actually saw some of that this week in a season where there has been a distressing lack of that from all over the run game.
Yeah, and what's incredible is that I think the last 3 weeks, McKinnon, I don't know if he's turned a corner or something, but he has been powering through guys in a way that I don't remember seeing at the beginning of the season. I don't know if this has resulted in a meaningful change in yards per carry. I believe it has. But just in terms of watching him and taking a look at what he does, he seems much more willing to do that. Obviously, in this specific game, his cuts seemed very sharp. That one is one that maybe that's because the Jaguars are bad and so it looks sharper. But I don't know. He performed really well in the game, especially as a receiver. I think Bradford hung him out to dry twice with 2 really ill-informed passes. But he turned one of those from an 8-yard loss into a 1-yard loss or a 0-yard gain. Which, I mean, that's pretty cool. But But yeah, no, I thought he performed really well in the game. His yards per carry wasn't amazing or anything like that, but I actually, per usual, don't blame him for that.
Yeah, and his, like you said, his performance as a receiver kind of outshined his performance as a running back, which again, the 2.21 yards per carry average kind of belies how good he looked when he was forcing, 2, 3, maybe even 4 Jaguars defenders to finish the tackle on him.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting is that if you take a look at sort of the offensive line performance, I think it's 2 different offensive lines essentially from the first half to the second half, especially in the passing game, which we'll talk about in a second. But in the running game, they were significantly less likely to just make mistakes, because in the first half they were less likely to just make mistakes individually, but they also wouldn't get you additional yards that often, except obviously in the second half and then out of the Asiata run. But for the most part in the second half, they were just more likely to make mistakes and just not. It was weird because it was more boom bust. In the first half, they wouldn't get you a bunch of additional yards and they wouldn't make a bunch of mistakes. In the second half, they made a bunch of mistakes, but occasionally would also just generate additional yards that a typical offensive line maybe wouldn't have. So, yeah, I don't know. The offensive line was not good as per usual. That's not new news, but it really created some specific problems for both McKinnon and Asiata, especially in that first half, and he got taken down behind the line. So I think that you take a look at Asiata or McKinnon's performance in that context, and I think you can be pretty happy with what he did, and Asiata too, actually.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the offensive line. Sam Bradford in the post-game press conference, which hopefully you're not hearing right now. Thanks, Autoplay. Sam Bradford in the post-game press conference said that, and I quote, he could not be more proud of the offensive line. That's not something I ever expected to hear necessarily this season.
Yeah, well, and it comes off of, and this is more about pass protection than it is run blocking, but it comes off of a 0-sack performance, and it's not an accident. You know how we've talked a couple of times on this podcast about how sacks are not the best measure. It's not that they're bad, right? But they're just they provide you with only part of the information that you need.
Yeah, it's not the whole story.
Right. And so very often they'll be misleading because the rest of the information, if we had it available to us, would tell us a different story. But in this case, Bradford wasn't under pressure that often. The thing is, in the first half, I noticed that Bradford was under pressure twice. period. The first half, he was only under pressure twice. One of them was his fault because he drifted in the pocket. If he had stayed sort of where he should have been in the pocket, he wouldn't have been under pressure. The second time turned out to be an amazing play on Bradford's part. I think it's one of the best quarterback plays I've ever seen.
Oh, is it the scramble?
Especially this year. Is when Yannick Ngakoue forced a fumble, which I guess it's not a sack if he gets a completion on the play. Bradford picks it up, throws it to McKinnon, and it ends up being, I think, a 15-yard gain.
Oh yes, that was phenomenal. That was some heads-up quarterback play.
Yeah, and he just and this is maybe one of the reasons people talk about big hands for quarterbacks. He just picked it up, right? Remember, most of the times we see these fumbles and defensive linemen are trying to pick it up and they can't, and they just kick it backwards or forwards even, and then he just rolls out of bounds and out to the offense's ball. Because they want to pick it up for a scoop and score, and Bradford just one-hands it, and he's like, now I'm throwing it. That was pretty nice. I liked it.
The exact right amount of sticky tack on his hands to pick up the ball and then be able to release it.
You have to investigate that.
But yeah, so I guess it's hard to pinpoint a great offensive line performance, but it seemed as though the unit as a whole was able to keep, like you were saying, in the first half from making any gross mistakes.
Yeah, and I will say in the second half, it obviously, for me to specify in the first half, that obviously means there's a different story in the second half. But I will say in the second half that it wasn't, as bad as you think it would be. If you hear there's a difference between the first half and the second half for this specific offensive line, and you also hear that the first half was good, you assume the second half was catastrophic. And it wasn't catastrophic. It just wasn't great. Clemmings gave up a lot of pressure. Fusco gave up a lot of pressure. And then when Fusco became Zach Kieran, he didn't do so hot either. Although, actually, in terms of pressure, Kieran was fine because he only had 2 pass blocking snaps that were genuine. So that's fine, I guess. But, Boone gave up 1 pressure all game. It occurred in the second half. Great game by him, by the way. I don't think he made a single run blocking mistake, so he definitely deserves praise. To the center, Nick Easton, he didn't give up any pressure. He had a really horrible run blocking game, but he didn't give up any pressure in the first or second half. Searles gave up some pressure in the second half. So when I say the second half was worse than the first half, I think it was worse than the average offensive line performance, but better than the average Vikings offensive line performance. So it still was a very good offensive line performance overall when you combine the two halves. And even if you only look at the second half, you'd say it's an improvement from pass protection.
Yeah, we were able to keep it sackless, which for our line that's pretty good. Even as West Coasty as the offense is.
Yeah, even accounting for the fact that the offense is getting rid of the ball faster. There are even some plays where the offense decided to, and I talked about this in the 1500 article about how to attack the Jaguars defense, and I was like, this is one of those games where you have to just be comfortable taking some risks in terms of pass protection, take some deep drops, take some more time, let some plays develop, and then throw the ball because they're just less likely to create pressure even on an offensive line as bad as this. And they did that. I think that this is something that we both saw. The Vikings were like, hey, in this game we might have more time than usual. Why don't we use it? And they did. We saw a couple of plays. We saw those 3 big plays that I mentioned. Right. We also saw a couple of plays where Bradford just had a bunch of time in the pocket, and then he might have checked down or he scrambled. And in some of those instances, I thought, he made a mistake. I thought that he should have taken a little bit more advantage of the time in the pocket, not by spending more time, but by going through his progressions a little bit more concisely. Because I thought there were people open when I looked in the All-22. For example, he had a 4-yard scramble where Adam Thielen was open with 0 defenders within 5 yards of him, and he was open 12 yards downfield. It would have been a first down. But for the most part, the Vikings took advantage of it by calling some plays that took a little bit longer, and he had time. So even in the confines of how quickly this offense has been going, this is an example, I think, of a game where the offense decided to go quick still for most of its passes, but less quick because of the performance that they expected to see, and it was nice to see. So this is the first instance where we've seen the offensive line perform well enough that the offense can take advantage of it as opposed to have to account for it, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, and you sort of saw that on the drive that that ended in the game's only turnover, regrettably, when the Vikings were able to pretty much deal down the field, first, second down, and then we're in the red zone. Pass left doesn't work, pass right kind of works, gets us close, and then we give it to Asiata, and he gets what looked like across the plane, but the refs disagreed, and then Asiata coughs up the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there were two instances where the ball slipped out of Asiata's hands. One, I think the first one, it ended up being ruled down.
No, that was the one where they got stopped at the one, right. That was before the fumble.
And the commentator kept on saying, the ball is vertical. That's so weird. Look at it. And then you just talk about it. Like the next 3 plays, even he would just talk about the ball was vertical. So there was that one, but the ball slipped out. The Jaguars recovered it in the end zone, and we're like, it's a touchback fumble. God damn it! But it turns out it wasn't that either. And then the second time he fumbled it, like legitimately fumbled it, and that's the one where I thought the Jaguars actually recovered it at the 1 instead of in the end zone. But they called it a touchback and whatever, I guess. It was almost worse for the Vikings to have the Jaguars pushed back, because the 2 times the Jaguars were pushed back. Inside the 10, they had a 90-yard touchdown drive and a 92-yard field goal drive. The other times, it's like 3 and out. They even had 2 3 and outs on the same play, on the same drive. Like, it's just like incredible what happened.
Well, but both of those drives were boosted by penalties on the Vikings. Like Xavier Rhodes basically brought Blake Bortles out of the end zone.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's like, that probably would ended up being the story of the game. If the Vikings lost, they ended up winning by 9. Certainly seemed like the game was closer than like the 9-point differential, but it also seemed like the Jaguars deserved to be down by 9 at the end of the game, if that makes sense.
Well, no, it broke open right at the end. It was after 7 field goals in the first 2.5 quarters. The game kind of broke open and broke the Vikings' way. But, realistically, the Jaguars counted 4 false start penalties in the first half alone. And then that was just a prelude to a penaltacular second half. And the poor officiating crew, I forget his name, but the guy that was leading the officiating crew was his second year in the league. And he did a great job calling the myriad penalties, some of them fairly uncommon, that the Jaguars were able to draw upon themselves.
Yeah, they had a false start on the center, a false start on the quarterback. They had a delay of game on a kickoff. They had a holding on a punt. I've never seen before.
The holding on a punt. They had the Vikings had a legal hit on a kicker because they deflected the kick first. And then the Jaguars had an illegal hit on the kicker, which was a larger penalty because they hit him on his plant leg.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Ooh.
Yeah, so the Vikings actually had a fairly whatever game in terms of penalties. But the Jaguars, determined to outdo the Vikings and everything awful, had a much worse game in terms of penalties.
Well, it was like the question I posited last week. If the Vikings were to give the Jaguars a win on a silver platter, would the Jaguars take it? And the answer appears to be no.
Yeah, they had. I think you wrote in the show notes how many penalties they had, right? 14?
14 penalties for 114 yards. The Vikings finished with 7 penalties for 93 yards, thanks to a long one from Mackenzie Alexander, a long PI from Mackenzie Alexander, and a long PI from Xavier Rhodes.
Yeah, and those 2 were the biggest plays for the Jaguars. Like, those are the biggest things that the Jaguars did for themselves. Not wrong.
That's true.
Other than that, it was like Marquise Lee, right? It was the Jaguars' scapegoat last year. Well, not their only one, but it was a guy that Jaguars fans were not huge fans of last year. Ends up acting as if he's the best receiver on the Jaguars this year, and he may very well be. Won a contested catch against Terrence Newman. Had an excellent back shoulder fade against Xavier Rhodes. That one, a lot of people want to blame Xavier Rhodes because he didn't turn his head around, which is identical to the penalty he had earlier on that same drive where he didn't turn his head around. But I blame Rhodes a lot less because that ball came instantly. Like, Lee stopped his route while the ball was in the air, turns around, sees that the ball is overthrown because it's Blake Bortles, and leaps into the air for an amazing catch. Like, that's all Lee. But yeah, those are the two plays that were probably not penalties that the Jaguars could be pretty proud of. Yeah, I don't know. Like it was a pretty solid, stout defensive performance if it wasn't for those two penalties, which reminds me actually of the 2014 Vikings.
That I'd say that comparison holds water.
Yeah, because I remember like Xavier Rhodes got penalties all the time, and Captain Munnerlyn got a couple of penalties because he was struggling within the scheme, yeah, it was, and we kept on saying Xavier Rhodes would have had a good game if it wasn't for the penalties. In this game, Xavier Rhodes had a pretty good game if it wasn't for the penalties, because the Mackenzie Alexander PI only occurred because Mackenzie Alexander was on the field for 2 snaps. And those 2 snaps occurred when Rhodes was taken out of the game, I think by Zimmer, not by the officials.
Yeah, that was like right after the unsportsmanlike conduct, and the ref warned him that if he were penalized again, he would be ejected, and Zimmer chose to have him sit out a couple. But just to wrap up on the offense before we, I guess, fully deep dive into the pretty good defensive performance, Matt Asiata looked pretty good everywhere except the red zone. He displayed like shiftiness and agility, especially sort of in the middle of the field. Before the touchdown that he finally scored, he made 4 rush attempts from the 3-yard line or less, and what did he get? 0 yards and a fumble?
Well, 0 net yards and a fumble.
0 net yards and a fumble.
Because he and one of those was definitely not his fault. So the Vikings I've been looking at a lot of these goal line plays. I'm probably going to write a piece for 1500 about it. Probably going to be up tomorrow morning. But in this game, the Vikings like to pull their guards on the goal line. I don't know if they've done it in other games. I'll take a look later. And sometimes that results in some pretty difficult blocks for some of the other players. And in this case, when I think Asiata was dropped for a 6-yard loss, I don't know. It was a run for loss. They had Brandon Fusco pull, and Fusco is a much better pulling guard than he is like a guard. Than he is, just blocking straight up. And so I guess it kind of makes sense that they would have Fusco pull on a power play. But there's a guy that was lined up, not head over him, but on his outside shoulder. And that meant that it was Jeremiah Searles' responsibility to block him before he could go through the gap left by Fusco pulling. And that's a pretty difficult block. It's either a reach block or a cut block. And Searles decided to cut block, and Sinderic Marks just stepped over him. Like it didn't impact him at all. And so he just barrels into the backfield and drops Asiata. So that one's not his fault. But some of the other ones, I don't know. And the thing is, the touchdown, I don't think was a particularly good play by Asiata. It just happened to be a good play by the offensive line because I think he read the touchdown incorrectly.
I think you're right. The announcers, when they were calling the game, were like, "Oh, Asiata pushed the whole squad forward," and I was like, "No, actually, that was the line doing the forward pushing, and Asiata just happened to get enough of a push from them to make his way into the end zone, and it seemed like he took the long way around the line." Yeah,
and there was a thing that opened up all the way to the right of him, where he even had like a bit of a kick-out block in a lane. There was a linebacker sort of waiting to see if he would bounce outside, so it's not necessarily like that would have been the best of all plays, but that's probably the play that most running backs would have taken, and I think it probably would have been the correct play. But in this case, the line ended up getting a good second effort on the push. I think you're right, I don't think it was Asiata. And he ended up getting a touchdown. His best plays were like just, he got stuffed. Like, it's not even fair. And then one of his worst plays, he ends up scoring a touchdown. Obviously, his worst play was the fumble. I don't know, man. It's weird. I thought he probably... So here's the thing. I think he deserves credit for a touchdown on that first play that ends up being a no gain. But I don't disagree with the refs for not overturning it, if it makes sense. Like, I thought the camera angle was not great because it wasn't a straight down the line camera angle. It was a little bit behind, and that made it look like the ball didn't cross the plane. I think the ball probably crossed the plane. But I think that you can't have an official be like, well, based off of what we know from geometry, there's a good chance the ball crossed the plane.
Yeah, I don't think that counts as incontrovertible visual evidence or whatever the standard in the rule book is.
Yeah. So if he deserves credit potentially for that touchdown, then you might as well just give him the touchdown on the play that he didn't do much on.
But then we wouldn't have ended with the hilarious score of 25-16, a score that has happened only 3 times in NFL history and twice to the Vikings this season.
Only because the Vikings are just the team that would end up having like just the right combination of like touchdowns, field goals, mixed extra points, and safeties for that to occur.
Just frustration and ineptitude, missed field goal. I guess we actually Forbath hit all his extra points, all 2 of them. So
yeah, no, he hit all his extra points. He also hit his field goals, 4 of them.
Well, he missed one after after a
right.
penalty. That was unfortunate.
There was the missed extra point.
Oh no, that's right. There was an extra point. Yep. Missed extra point.
See?
After a penalty. Womp womp. The ghost of Blair Walsh lives on.
Yeah, but see, Vikings fans weren't even. I guess it wasn't a home game, so that might have impacted like the way Vikings fans cheer. But Vikings fans weren't even mad because they were like, "Well, I mean, you made like the 8 or 9 other ones, so way better."
So you did kick 4 field goals in a row. This is fine. Just keep doing that.
It's great because it's like they wouldn't even give credit for Walsh for that in the Seahawks games. Like, you kicked 6 in a row, but that's 7th win. You got to make a 33-yard field goal.
Okay, but that was a pretty important make, and he did have a lot of practice. just to flip that one around a little bit.
Yeah, I know. Still, it's funny.
Defensively, a good day for the Vikings against a genuinely terrible team. Uncle Chaps, I think my favorite one-liner of many from the interview was when he, as playing a member of the Jaguars coaching staff, cried, "You can't get a first down on a first down. That's crazy talk." And sure enough, it was. The only time the Jaguars got a first down on a first down was when Xavier Rhodes gave it to them.
That's amazing, because the Jaguars were also not great on 3rd down.
Not as bad as the Vikings. The Jaguars were only 7 for 16 on 3rd down. The Vikings were a dismal 3 for 11.
And I think before the 4th quarter, they were like 1 for 9.
Yeah,
something like that.
That is
1 for 8, 1 for 7, something along those lines.
I have to scroll down a little further, but yeah, it wasn't good. It was not a Red Zone channel worthy performance, we'll say. Although if the Red Zone paid attention to defense, it would have been at least a couple of highlights. Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, and to a lesser extent, Daniil Hunter, capitalizing on the general softness of the Jaguars' offensive line by sacking Blake Bortles 4 times.
Yeah, it was a great performance by the defensive line. Again, you could say, hey, sacks don't tell the whole story. And in this case, if you had all the numbers, you might conclude that the Vikings didn't put that much pressure on the Jaguars, because individually, no player put on an extraordinary amount of pressure. Everson Griffin ends up putting in more pressure than like the average elite, if that makes sense. Among elites, the average among them.
Well, as he does.
Yeah, than the average elite defensive end, with like 16 or 17% of pass rushing snaps turning into pressure. And that's fine. That's obviously great, not just fine. But the rest of the defensive line didn't end up putting that much pressure on the quarterback, relatively speaking. But combined, Bortles was under a lot of pressure. Everson Griffin had a fantastic game. Obviously, those 2 sacks. He also got a lot of pressure. He also had, I think, a batted pass or 2.
At least one. I definitely saw one. There might have been a second.
Yeah. And I believe he ended up with a run stop as well, a tackle for loss. Daniil Hunter ended up with 2 run stops. He got a couple of pressures, and then he had a sack. Brian Robinson ends up with a sack. Linval Joseph may have had the best game of all of them without registering a sack. He had a phenomenal game. I was arguing with Pro Football Focus about his game last week, and I was saying he actually had a pretty good game, and they're like, "Oh, he had a friggin' shit game." And I was like, "Wait, how are we watching the same game?" And so we traded gifts back and forth, and as with many things that people believe, I'm not sure this is actually the truth, but for a lot of people, it is the truth. The truth in this case lies in the middle. He probably ended up having an okay game last week, but he had a phenomenal game this week, and PFF and I kind of agree on that one. He put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. He redirected runners a lot. So he ended up with a really great, just monstrous tackle for loss. But he also ended up enabling some other tackle for loss. And the defensive line was just really solid in the run game. If you take a look at run stop percentage, TJ Yeldon's actually been a relatively successful running back. He just hasn't gotten a ton of yards on his successes. He usually gets like the minimum amount that requires for it to be a success, and then not much more. And in this case, he didn't even get that high of a run success rate, something like 35%, which is really low. It's lower than the Vikings running backs this year. And that's because of the defensive line. And the successes that they ended up having were actually not on the defensive line because they ended up being almost all bounced to the outside. And those were because of Anthony Harris or Eric Kendricks or Anthony Barr. Those weren't even on the defensive line. So they did a really good job bottling up the run game as well as putting a bunch of pressure on Blake Bortles.
It's true. You saw TJ Yeldon running back and forth across the line of scrimmage a lot in such a fashion as to allow Marquise Lee to be the leading offensive threat downfield for Jacksonville, which I don't think anyone expected, even Jacksonville.
Yeah. And I don't think they expect. I mean, Marquise Lee has been their second leading receiver or their receiving leader this year, and I think every single game, Jacksonville Jaguars fans are surprised at how well he performs. That's how bad he's been for the last 2 years. Is that every time he does something, people are like, "Oh my god, he's doing stuff. That's crazy." Did you know he did stuff last week too? Nuts, crazy, I tell you.
Marquise, pleasant surprise, Lee. Special teams wise, do you think we should fire Adam Thielen for calling for a fair catch and then letting the ball bounce? I mean, that was like 10 whole yards.
Like, it's pretty easy to criticize Adam Thielen for punt returns now, isn't it? Just be like, yeah, I mean, you screwed up royally last week, so you probably screwed up this week.
You didn't cost us the game this week, so it's better, but it's still not great. Let the Marcus Sherrills watch continue. When's he coming back? That's what I want to know.
Oh, yeah, I tweeted out like an NFL injury report or Vikings injury report from this week, and I didn't even notice if I saw Sherrills' name. Let's see if I can find it. It's from my good buddy Sam Ekstrom at Cold Omaha. He handles a lot of the day-to-day stuff at Cold Omaha. I got to give him a lot of credit because, like, I don't like write about important breaking news. Like Harrison Smith might be ready. I just write like, hey, is this backup practice squatter any good? and he's like, Arif didn't write the Harrison Smith story. I got to write this Harrison Smith story.
Arif will be back later this week with a comprehensive breakdown of weeks 6 through 10 of the Minnesota Vikings. Meantime, a bunch of stuff is happening right now. Sam Ekstrom is here with the story, and the story.
Yeah, so he tweeted out that Berger is active, Sherrills is active, Edmund Robinson is active. I assume that's Edmund Robinson. And Adrian Peterson is active. So
the Adrian Peterson news managed to overshadow the much more important Marcus Sherrills news.
Well, yeah, I mean, Marcus Sherrills clearly has a much bigger impact on games.
Yeah, he absolutely does. I am enthusiastic for his return. Any other takeaways from this game besides the one at the goal line that you would like to highlight? Anything that we necessarily missed in our recap?
Jeff Locke played well again. And there was only 1 week where Jeff Locke played poorly, probably. Although again, I think his first week, I think people say he played well, and I don't think he played well. So we'll say that's 2 games where he hasn't played well, and hopefully 14. I guess we'll see. But 12 games where he has played really well. Yeah, he's like a Pro Bowler at this point, man. Probably not. I'm sure there are punters better than him, but right now he's playing so well. I'm just like, I've never seen better punting in my life.
Did you see they're adding dodgeball to the Pro Bowl?
Yes. Oh my God. How is that not in our show notes? They're adding dodgeball. They've got like a couple of quarterback skills competitions. Don't care. They have dodgeball. I want to see Odell Beckham in dodgeball. I bet he's crazy good.
I know. I want to watch these guys play dodgeball. I want to see an all quarterback dodgeball.
Right? Okay. So this would be hilarious, right? So, not that Josh McCown's going to make the Pro Bowl or anything like that, but he deserves to play a Pro Bowl dodgeball because he is still a crazy good athlete. I don't know if you've seen like the videos of him like playing basketball and stuff like he plays basketball with with like I don't know what for the local team, but like with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and like some stuff, like some other players. And he was like balling. He's like really good. And then also he plays quarterback, so I assume he can throw a dodgeball. He might be a better dodgeball player than a quarterback.
What if you could what if you made it like AFC versus NFC? And what do you have on a standard dodgeball team? 7, 8?
8, sure. I don't know, man.
Say you've got 4 quarterbacks, and then like in your back row, and then 4 receivers in your front row.
That makes total sense.
That would be. I might actually rather watch that than the actual Pro Bowl game.
So when you select quarterbacks for your dodgeball team, you don't necessarily want good quarterbacks. Like if you got a quarterback that happens to throw to receivers who drop the ball a lot, you've got to be thinking, hey, what if?
You would think Blake Bortles would be ideal.
Blake Bortles, Carson Wentz.
Carson Wentz is up there, yeah.
Sam Bradford, I guess.
Yeah, just because he's quick and he can throw pretty hard. I think Aaron Rodgers has to be the prohibitive favorite.
Right. Yeah. So those are the 4 quarterbacks you want because they throw drops all the time.
Well, yeah, and they Bortles and Rodgers at least throw very hard. And ideally you want to force drops you either want to hit the quarterback in the back row of the opposing team or you want to force a drop on the receiver.
We missed a quarterback that's perfect for this. The best quarterback for this.
Colin Kaepernick?
Colin Kaepernick.
Oh, boy. So we didn't miss him after all. Oh, man. Wow. All right. So now I'm actually enthusiastic for the Pro Bowl, just for dodgeball.
But, okay, most of the quarterbacks we named are not going to be there. But still, it's going to be fun.
It'll still be an enjoyable time. Who was it? I think it was somebody. I think it might have been Tom Pelissero, but somebody tweeted out, they're really just making the Pro Bowl more and more like recess, which I support.
Well, they're making it more like it used to be, which happened to be like recess. Because remember they had like a bunch of skills competitions. They had like tug of war between offensive linemen.
Oh yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, and like the throw the ball through the target. Like the like moving target. Like, yeah, the different day. Yeah, it's like a skills day, except more fun, and with veterans.
Okay, so here's the way that I see the evolution of the Pro Bowl going. So they're going to diminish the game a lot, maybe eliminate the game entirely after a while, and they're going to increase the number of skills competitions so that like there's something for basically every position player, right? So you've got a punt, pass, and kick competition, for example, that kickers and punters will just dominate, or tug of war for offensive linemen and stuff like that. Hopefully they don't get injured, right? But still. And then they'll find a skills competition in there that's short, something you can replicate without much equipment, and really fun and exciting, and they'll use that to replace overtime. Or if overtime ties, that's how they'll resolve the overtime tie.
I like that. Why can't they prime that in the Pro Bowl and then incorporate that in the regular season? Like sudden death skills match overtime after 1 quarter.
Yeah, maybe that's. I think they haven't even thought about it yet. I think you and I are just so ahead of the Pro Bowl. Not that hard to do.
Well, they do something similar in hockey. I mean, it's there's shootouts in hockey. Why not after a quarter of overtime in football just break out the quarterback targets and have the 2 quarterbacks a little throw and shootout?
Yeah, like in soccer, there's penalty kicks. Although in soccer that makes a lot of sense because your players would die otherwise. Like you can't have your players run a marathon every game.
It's true. They'd have to rest up for 2 days and do it again. Yeah.
So yeah. So I think that's the same for football. I think after 5 quarters, you have to be like, "There's no way we can make these players do it." All right, get your strongest dude. We're playing tug of war.
Right. Pick your 6 best linemen, offensive or defensive. Get the rope.
So, for the Vikings, it would be Linval Joseph, maybe Brandon Fusco, Alex Boone, Everson Griffin, and Jerick McKinnon.
Wow, that's a pretty lethal tug of war team. And then we could get rid of all these ridiculous ties that seem to keep happening every year.
I love this idea. I hope listeners respond to this idea. Maybe you could email us your ideas for the skills competition they should both incorporate in the Pro Bowl and then also potentially make a candidate to resolve. ties after overtime.
Exactly, something that would be doable in a game in the future that we could test out in a few iterations in the next few Pro Bowls. You can email us at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, like 3 of our listeners did this week for the mailbag.
Do you think it's time to go to the mailbag? Are we that far?
Aren't we? I mean, we
we are. No,
we
yeah,
covered the most important stuff already. I mean, we talked about dodgeball. I think.
Yeah,
I think we hit the week's top story
a while ago. That's perfect. All right, cool.
Alrighty. Andrew Springer writes in, Yo, Arif. Yo. First time Q&A here. Well, first time Q. We'll see about the A. We obviously need to fix our first and goal situation. I'm sure the whole episode is about this subject. You would be maybe incorrect, but we did talk about it.
We touched on it.
If you haven't talked about bringing in Wildcat to this situation, what are your thoughts? Would it work? Would an 8 or 9 man box easily counter that? I feel like it can't get much worse than Matt Asiata trying to go under the line.
So, yes, I understand. Yeah, I understand it can't get much worse because it probably can't. I'm not so confident in the Wildcat, but I'm also not confident enough to tell them not to try it. Like, I think they should try it. I just don't have a bunch of confidence in the prospects for it, but I don't think that means they should not do it, because I think that you're right that the risk aversion here makes no sense, because we're already the status quo is very risky as it is. So I think they should try the Wildcat. Of all of the potential solutions, I think that should be on the board, but is also not one of my favorites. I agree that the Vikings should be more innovative about what they do, and I'm trying to take a look at what they're doing in goal line situations. But the problem is it's a different failure every time. So the Vikings, I think, attempted goal line runs 6 times in this game, and obviously they were only successful, or only created a touchdown on one of them. I suppose technically they were also successful on Jerick McKinnon's run on 1st and goal from the 3, because he got 2 yards. And generally speaking, if you get at least 40% of the yardage you need, then that's a successful run. And obviously that's 66%. So from that perspective, I guess they were successful. But they only got a touchdown 1 of those 6 times. And that's obviously bad. There's not a bunch of ambiguity about that. The problem is it's a different problem every time. So once, for example, Brandon Fusco on a power run, this time in the opposite direction than the one I talked about earlier in the show, ends up kicking out against a defensive back, which ends up having Zach Line take on a linebacker, which is fine. That's his job, but you much rather have Zach Line on a defensive back and Brandon Fusco on a linebacker. And that would create a bigger, better hole for Matt Asiata to go through. On that same play, Zach Line ends up taking on the linebacker with the wrong shoulder, which forces Matt Asiata to cut inside instead of outside. And if he cuts inside, there's another linebacker there waiting for him. So that was a problem. Another problem is that Searles doesn't have the ability to get off of double teams, and Senderick Marks had a really good game at the goal line, so, props to him. But doesn't know how to get off of a double team, just in general, it seems like, but also at the goal line, in order to get up to one of those linebackers. So that's a different problem. Nick Easton, if he's a one-on-one with the guy, is going to lose. That's another problem. And so those were, and that was a different problem on each of those different goal line plays. And so to say, we should call a different play at the goal line, just take into account that you calling a different play maybe resolves 2, maybe 3 problems, but not 5. So that's something that you need to that the Vikings need to think about in terms of the way that they're going to solve this goal line problem. I do think the Wildcat should be on board. I think that they should bring Linval Joseph back as a fullback. I know Mike Zimmer said that they were going to think about that for sure, but they decided to pull back from it because Linval Joseph was dealing with a couple of nicks, something new. We hadn't heard that he was dealing with some minor injuries, and that's fine because he's been playing well, and he hasn't been on the injury report, so they don't have to report it. But they want to keep him healthy, which makes sense because he's really key to the defense. But they should try him out there because even though he actually hasn't been a fullback, they could actually play him as a fullback at fullback. The one time he blocked somebody, which wasn't important because I think it was a play action pass to Kyle Rudolph for a touchdown. He didn't end up doing a very good job, but whatever. I mean, he's big, so they should try it. They should also try spreading out the defense, go 4 wide, have a running back there. They should try quarterback sneaks. I know Sam Bradford is not the healthiest individual when you go through his career history, but I like touchdowns. I think he likes touchdowns. He seems to be a super tough guy. So they might as well try it. He's wearing a flak jacket now, so, it'll be fine. Right? They should try a lot of things, is more my point. I just don't know which of those things will work.
Well, and I like the idea of there being more variety because it seems like they tend to line up in the same goal line formation, and it makes not that our offense isn't relatively predictable to begin with, but it makes it pretty easy to spot the guy you need to block and then block him. So we're not very good at like Drew said, going under the line.
Yeah.
Drew also writes from Dallas, Texas, where I assume he lives for work and not for pleasure. Logan Reed writes in this week, which poor, stupid team hires Jeff Fisher next? Will it be this coming year, or does he remain unemployed for 2017? Well, I bet the Jaguars have a coaching vacancy after the season.
Yeah, I was gonna make a Jaguars joke about Jeff Fisher when I heard the news, but then I realized that because I heard the news 2 hours later than everyone else, that everyone's already gonna have made that joke. Mm-hmm. I checked Twitter. I Twitter searched Jaguars Jeff Fisher, and enough people did it that I held back. But yeah, that seems perfect, right? I can't think of a more appropriate fit. Also, if the Jaguars go 7-9 for 3 seasons, huge improvement.
That would be a massive improvement over their what are they going to be? 3-13 this year? 2-14.
I think you could make Jeff Fisher a transitional coach because through will or fate or magic, he brings a team to 7-9, possibly 8-8 from being awful. So you do that. That means you've got a team in place, and then you bring in a real coach. It's not even a bad idea to bring in Jeff Fisher, and he can finally win the loss record because he was 3 games away, right?
So you can just lock it in. He can be the sole owner of most losses as a head coach.
Yeah. So yeah, I would not only expect it, but surprisingly advocate for it. Then they'll get a team in place. They'll have a very stout defense because that's what Jeff Fisher teams do. And then they'll bring in a real coach. Maybe the defense gets worse. Who cares? They'll start winning more. That'll be fine. But also, it just seems right, doesn't it? I know the Jaguars have been approaching first-time head coaching candidates a lot. I know they've got a department that is actually a pretty smart analytics department. I've been checking my sources. The Jaguars don't actually listen to their analytics department as often as they should, because I got a list of, and I can't even divulge the list. Doesn't that suck? I got a list of players that they really liked before the draft, and most of those players actually ended up performing really well. And this is just the list that the analytics department liked. A lot of those players were not drafted by the Jaguars. Some of the ones that were drafted by the Jaguars did well. Most of the ones that were drafted by the Jaguars did well. Some of them did not. But generally speaking, their data analysis department is actually pretty good. It just doesn't get acknowledged as often as it would. And then when it's in the press, for example, when you see, for example, Tony Khan talk about yeah, we really like the Blake Bortles pick. He's such and such on third down in road games against Power 5 teams or whatever. It's more that he's being asked to justify a pick than he is being asked to divulge why they picked that guy. So my point is that they actually do have a pretty forward-thinking group within that staff, within that front office, and they might end up hiring a good coach or a coach that doesn't have any obvious flaws. But it just feels right that Jeff Fisher's going to be the guy. And then they're going to draft Leonard Fournette 3rd overall and be dumb about it. It'll be great.
Poor Leonard. Brian Bjorgen writes in, hey guys, like always, thank you for the excellent show and 2-ish hours of solid entertainment a week. Oh, you're welcome. When I listen to the show, occasionally I will go back and listen to a show just to, do the occasional sound check or whatever and make sure that it isn't that bad. And it never seems like entertainment to me, but that's because I've already said all the things I say on the show. So, I don't know. First off, could all the fans complaining about the Jacksonville game being an ugly win just stop? Where have they been the last few years? When do we not win ugly? I can only think of a few games that we won over the last few years that were even close to quote-unquote pretty wins. Ugly is who we are. Oh, Adam Thielen may not be the most conventionally handsome person, but that's neither here nor there, I would say. Also, I would say that the other game this season where the Vikings won by a score of 25-16 would qualify as a relatively pretty win. Week 1 over the Titans.
Well, I think a lot of people think of games without a bunch of offensive scores as ugly, and so that game to a lot, like to you and me, maybe that's like a relatively pretty win. I think to a lot of people that's an ugly win because the offense didn't do its job in that game, which I guess is true. Because there's a bunch of it was like a special teams and a defensive score, right?
Yeah. Well, but that's like, I mean, we all kind of knew, or at least we were all hoping. I mean, you and I were certainly hoping this. That's what the Vikings would look like this season. You know, the offense would be a bunch of like folding chairs held together with toothpicks and duct tape, and then defense and special teams would, you know, be league leaders and mostly carry the day for us. And that was exactly what happened. I don't know. I guess I see what you mean, though. It's to me. I think we're both pretty clear about this on the show. It's a question of whether the Vikings in particular meet their expectations for where they're supposed to be good, as opposed to just winning in like a conventional like Tom Brady style way.
So I think that the concern from ugly wins, I think whether or not people say it, is because they think that this is not sustainable. It can't be replicated going forward. And I think that the Vikings' ugly wins this year have kind of proven that, right? That it wasn't sustainable and it wasn't something they could rely on going forward. So another ugly win is not the same as, I guess, a pretty win, right? Because those wins tend to come from like excellent execution from the people that are supposed to be doing their jobs, as opposed to some people extraordinarily executing outside of their normal talent range. Or like if Linval Joseph gets a sack, fumble, strip, and score, right? Like that's great. Like he scored a touchdown. That's amazing. He's a very good player. That's outside of his normal talent range. He's like the best nose tackle in the NFL. That's outside of his normal talent range. And so you can't count on that going forward. So I think that's the concern with ugly wins. But I think that like you should be happy about a win and also be critical of like the flaws in those wins. And in this game, I think that some of the flaws are things that we should be concerned about going forward. I think that there was actually more positives about this game than negatives, even though everyone was upset during the game. And that's fine, too, because I think that your reaction during the game I think it's important, but I don't think it's as important as analyzing the game afterwards. I do think that your reaction during the game is something that like people kind of dismiss a little bit too much, but like it points to stuff that is like eminently important to you at the time in the context of the emotions of the game without knowing whether or not you're going to win. And that's relatively important. So, there's positive stuff in the game.
I think that too, like if you look at the final score and then you go back and look at my little like curse-laden furious tweet storm in the second half of the game, it just really was a situation where the Vikings could easily gift wrap and hand a win to a really bad team. But then we didn't, which was nice.
Then we did.
So would you say that a synonym for ugly win might be lucky win?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I think that if someone said lucky win, they might think more about, hey, this was an upset. If someone plays the New England Patriots, right? Like, let's say, who's playing the New England Patriots this week? Some losers, right?
That's a good question. Not the Ravens.
Look it up. Not the Ravens. So for me, an ugly win is one that occurs unsustainably, potentially. There's a lot in there that like, if you've got like a special team score and a defensive score, it could actually be a relatively pretty win. But I think that one that occurs in spite of your best self, right? Oh, it's the Broncos, so kind of losers.
Yeah, some losers.
Right. You'd be familiar with the Broncos' recent history of losing. So the Broncos, they're like not favored to win, right? Probably by a score, probably by 7 points. Because they're at home. If it was at England, it might be by 13 points. That's my guess. I haven't looked up the Vegas, but that's probably a good guess. If they win by 20 points, a lot of people will still call that a pretty win and a lucky win. And so when I say a lucky win or an unlucky loss, I'm probably talking about maybe not always, but I'm probably talking about the sustainability of the types of plays that let them win the game. Whereas a lot of people will be talking about the odds of winning the game beforehand. Like, you were not likely to win, you ended up winning. That's, to a lot of people, that's a lucky win. So that, I think, is a synonym for it, but I think it doesn't capture it in sort of the same way.
Yeah, that's fair. But like Minnesota beating Dallas would have been considered both an ugly and a lucky win.
Yeah, that would have fit sort of everyone's definitions of both things.
Ooh. Get your definitional arguments here. Wow, I got so sidetracked by that. Actual questions now. Brian writes, sorry about that. I feel better. Couple questions. 1, has anything changed schematically on defense in the last couple of weeks? We seem to be producing on a higher level similar to our hot start.
I think that the defense is going a little bit back to some of the defensive schematic stuff that they did before. So I think during the losses, and I don't think this is actually the reason, I think it's incidental, because it's not as if the Vikings defense has played poorly during most of those losses. But I think during the losses, we saw the defense do some interesting third down packages that were not AA gap blitzes, something that we kind of like associate with Mike Zimmer now. And we saw a lot more Brian Robinson standing up. So we saw basically 3 down linemen, with Brian Robinson being essentially a blitzing linebacker on third downs a lot. We're still seeing that. It's actually an extremely effective package. In fact, I was talking to Sam Ekstrom on the Locked On podcast, and he asked me to guess what the most effective package over the past 4 games was in creating sacks. And I guessed it was Everson Griffin, Tom Johnson, Brian Robinson, and Daniil Hunter, which is not an extraordinarily difficult guess, but like it means that it's probably not the AA look, because you're taking a defensive tackle off the field, and a AA look usually has 2 defensive tackles. And it turns out that was right. And so that's not the reason that's the problem, but they are changing that schematically to go back to more AA gap looks these past couple of games, and then including that package when it's successful. So that's actually not a problem. It's something that they're improving. So that's a change, and I think it's an incidental change. I think that from a coverage perspective, I think that they're going back to some of the stuff they did earlier in terms of matchup coverages, in terms of mixed man zone coverages, and what they do with their safeties. Because I think they like cover 1, except in obvious passing situations where they go to cover 2 or cover 4 a lot. And I think they were trying a little bit more cover 4 than normal, and now they're back. So those are the changes. I just don't know if those defensive changes are so significant as to be the reason the Vikings are winning now. I think really it's about offensive changes.
Next question. What are the odds that Chad Greenway decides not to retire? Haven't noticed that much of a drop-off in play compared to last year. And how sick does that thought make you, Arif?
I think the 2 worst losses this year were the games where Chad Greenway played the most snaps. So I'm putting that out there.
Yikes.
Greenway's had some really good plays. I don't think he's necessarily had that many really good games. And so they really limit his snap count a lot. They like to go in a nickel, and I think part of it's because of him. Because there are times when Captain Munnerlyn is a better run defender than Chad Greenway is. And that is with the context that the blocker who's blocking him is not a fullback, but a receiver. But it does speak to how sometimes the more effective run package is one, run defense package is one where the other team decides to run against your nickel when you've got 3 or 4 receivers out there, than when the other team decides to be in ace or whatever and run a fullback against a linebacker. So it's not that Chad Greenway is a worse run defender than Captain Munnerlyn, but situationally, given the context of where they appear, Captain Munnerlyn is more likely to be in situations where he can perform more as a run defender than Chad Greenway. I still think that Greenway has actually played somewhat poorly in a lot of these games, but in this last game, I thought he played well on his snaps. I think there's another game where he played really well. That game, obviously, the Vikings decided to @ me. That was hilarious.
I remember that. That was pretty funny.
But for the most part, I think he might actually reconsider retiring, but I think that he should not. I think
he should not reconsider retiring.
He should not reconsider retiring. I think you reconsider reconsidering, basically.
So just consider retiring.
Exactly.
Let's eliminate and then yeah, exactly.
It's like simplifying fractions, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Eliminate duplicates and simplify. Consider retiring, Chad Greenway.
Hey, he's probably a great coach if he wants to stay in football. Sounds like he doesn't, but he could do that. He's been pretty effective as like a commentator on Fox Sports. He's super charismatic. Might do commentary.
It's true. You have spoken of what a nice guy he is in the past.
He's a nice guy. I don't even mean that as like a backwards compliment. like, oh, he's a bad football player, but he's a nice guy. Or like quarterbacks who are good leaders, but also bad quarterbacks.
He's just a nice guy who happens to play football at a lower than top tier level. Yeah.
Nice guy, Linval Joseph. Nice guy, great guy, Everson Griffin. Putting that out there. So it's not like you can only say nice guy about bad players. It just comes up more often because people want to compliment people, and that's the first compliment they go to when you're not good at your job.
Oh boy! Finally, from Brian, I had a friend ask me who our quarterback of the future is. I said it's Teddy until we see for sure that it's not. He thinks that we roll with and then extend Sam Bradford since he's only 28 and has played beyond most people's expectations. I would say probably even Bradford's own. Or is there a third way? Do we end up starting from scratch? Your thoughts?
I don't think we start from scratch unless Bradford regresses and Teddy is dead.
Like actually dead, not like Sharif Floyd dead.
Right? Like murdered. No, that's too... I'd rather him die of natural causes. That's too much. Wow. Cross the line, Arif.
All right.
This is too much. I love you, Teddy.
What were we talking about?
No, I think that it's probably going to be Teddy. I wouldn't be surprised if they went with a genuine quarterback competition. The thing is, Pat Shurmur friggin' loves Sam Bradford, right? Because he was his offensive coordinator in St. Louis. He's his quarterback's coach / passing coordinator in Philadelphia. Was a big component of getting Sam Bradford here, and then now gets to coordinate him again. So if he makes the decision, he might be consciously or unconsciously biased in favor of Sam Bradford. But I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being quarterback competition. I do think Teddy is a better quarterback. Obviously, Bradford's numbers this year, better, not much actually. They might not be better. He was playing like a top 10 quarterback at the beginning of the season. I don't know if he's there. We'll see. I don't know. Teddy had a really high ESPN QBR, which I think speaks to some of the stuff that doesn't get captured by like passer rating or adjusted net yards per attempt. You know what? I'm going to look this up right now. So Bradford leads the league in completion percentage. So in QBR, he's at 72.9, and in adjusted net yards per attempt, he's at 6.36. Teddy Bridgewater last year, and mind you, I thought Teddy Bridgewater was going to take a huge step this year based off of what we saw in the preseason and also in training camp, because he was just freaking phenomenal in training camp. Just the net yards per attempt significantly lower at 5.7. That probably has to do with a high sack rate. I think that's a play calling problem. His ESPN QBR is 62.7, so also not as high as the 72 point whatever that Bradford had. Quarterback rating of 88.7 versus a quarterback rating of 98.2. So Bradford's numbers are better this year. Probably because of the interception thing. Actually, it's almost entirely because of interceptions. Very similar touchdown rates, very similar yards per attempt. It's just interception avoidance. So, yeah, I think even though Teddy's numbers are last year are worse than Bradford's numbers this year, that Teddy is probably the quarterback of the future.
Well, all right. Let's turn our attention to the Twitter. Oh, you can email us your questions at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And Brian from Missouri includes an end note. How do I get in on that sweet fantasy football league you guys run? Remind us again. as fantasy football season approaches in like August, just shoot us an email. Once again, that address is norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Or you can DM us or tweet at us if we don't follow you at NorseCodeDN on the Twitter, where you can also send mailbag questions like these fine folks did. Alex Goebel at Euleron writes in, is it just me or did the ball touch the grass on one of those Bortles windups?
He might have, man. He's got some Tebow throwing motions in him this year.
Yeah, man, his mechanics are not good.
Yeah, I think I saw someone on Jaguars Twitter. I wish I could remember who it was so I could give them credit for it. But they were like, let's bring in Josh McDaniels. Look what he did with left-handed Tebow. Imagine what he could do for right-handed Tebow.
There'd be no stopping him. Or all stopping him.
Yeah, right.
One of the two. No, I thought it was funny that basically the only like perfect tight spiral Blake Bortles threw was for a touchdown. Like that was, it was a very
sad,
like,
but also super. It was a pretty good throw. Actually,
it was a flash of brilliance. You know, it was just a straight, fast spiral into a tight window that went for a touchdown, and then the rest was just like him closing his fist and then attempting to throw the ball. Like,
you push it like a shot put.
Exactly. Corey Strickland at Contract Corey writes, serious question. Did the Dotson pick scare the Vikings into picking Laquan Treadwell? Is he really worse than CJ is? I don't know who he's referring to.
Charles Johnson.
Yes.
I thought this was already out there, but I'm pretty confident that a lot of people with sources, not my sources, other people's sources. My sources have dried up, man. I'm pissed. New coaching staff, so that's going to happen, I guess. But yeah, I think a lot of people who know people in the know, so like third person removed, is that the Dotson pick did scare the Vikings. I think they even had Dotson higher than Treadwell, which again, like that's not a problem. Like I remember, I think I tweeted this out during the draft that Treadwell was their second or third receiver. And that their top receiver got chosen. That's not a bad thing. That happens at the 23rd spot all the friggin' time. Like the issue is if Treadwell doesn't bear out, why was he their third receiver, right? Like that's the bigger problem. It's not they didn't get their top guy, now they're doomed, right? Because I mean, Stephon Diggs wasn't their top guy. They valued him correctly, but I guess incorrectly, like because everyone was wrong on him. They were just the least wrong on him, but. Yeah, I am pretty confident that the reports out are now that that's what happened and that they had a pretty high grade on Josh Dotson. Interestingly, Dotson's about as effective as Treadwell right now. So the difference, of course, is that like the Washington Redskins have like Pierre Garçon and Jamison Crowder and some other dudes, Jordan Reed. Got some good targets. That's the difference.
Since we don't have a first rounder this year, will we have to get a punt gunner through free agency?
It'll be tough. You can find a punt gunner, somewhere, man. I think they're going to re-sign Patterson, which I wouldn't have expected at the beginning of the year. He's the least good of all the first-round punt gunners, but he's improved over the course of the season. They still got Trey Waynes. They'll probably keep him at punt gunner. I have no idea. I don't know, man. You need that backup punt gunner. Treadwell actually did a really good job. Probably him.
So one of the three guys they already have, basically.
Yeah. If Trey Waynes is promoted and Patterson signs with another team, then you've only got one first-round punt gunner. Not that Marcus Sherrills isn't the best punt gunner on the roster, but like, what if he gets hurt? You need a backup first-round punt gunner.
Caleb Arndt at Caleb Arndt on Twitter writes, if the team decides to move on from Sharif Floyd, what do you think they could get for him in a trade?
Well, he's on IR now, so nothing. If they traded him in the offseason, probably not much just because of his injury. Especially because Zimmer said something like dealing with 6 years of knee injuries. Like, that's going to scare off any team. So... yeah, it's. I don't think you give very much. Maybe a sixth. which sucks because like maybe he's not Aaron Donald good, but he's like Geno Atkins good.
He's good.
Healthy. He's so good when he's healthy.
So, fifth-year option it is?
Yeah. That's what you'd be trading away, a fifth-year option, right? That's the contract. So let him play out the fifth-year option and then kind of see what happens. I don't know. I really like him. I don't want to trade him away. He's probably going to be healthy at the beginning of the season. It's weird. I don't remember him having like injury concerns coming out of college.
Austin at SkullBlink182. Is the playoff window just about shut after all the tiebreakers in Week 14 went against the Vikings? Yeah, that was unfortunate, wasn't it?
It's hilarious. I mean, it sucked. Also really funny. The Vikings had a 21 to 28% chance, according to a bunch of these websites, Football Outsiders, Number Fire, 538. 21 to 28% chance of making the playoffs. After their win, they have a 19% chance of making the playoffs, according to a lot of these websites. I think Football Outsiders had them at 28 and then dropped them to 14, so that's the biggest difference. 538 had them at 21 and dropped them to 19. But their model is significantly less sticky than Football Outsiders is because their model takes into account a couple of seasons worth of performance. Obviously weighted, otherwise that wouldn't make sense. But yeah, it's they're down for sure, but not out.
Yeah, I mean the Lions could still lose out.
Yeah, if the Lions lose out, the Vikings win out, they win the division. Like the Vikings win the division.
Yeah,
unlikely, but you know.
Ted Glover at Purple Buckeye, host of Roughing the Podcast, also available on DailyNorseman.com. Do you like the color pattern of a jaguar or the sexy brown of a mountain lion, and why?
That's weird, man. Ted has like some stuff to get off his chest.
This is all about how you don't like cats, right?
No, well, it is about. That was that Kyle Seagal joke, right, from like a long time ago, because he wrote a story into Vikings territory about a fictional organization that Aaron Henderson was like donating to about big cats, and I didn't publish it because it was fake. He was like, it's because of my bias against big cats. I don't think Ted was talking about that.
Well, Kyle's married now, so we don't have to worry about him. Regrettably, other people have taken up the mantle of non-news, which is something entirely separate from fake news.
Not as concerning as fake news, evidently.
This did not catch fire due to carefully targeted dark advertising on Facebook. There is no secret Facebook group for lovers of big cats, as far as I know. Unless Ted knows something we don't.
It's a secret, man. How would you know?
Well, if I haven't seen it, it's news to me.
Well, the question was about colors, though, right?
Yeah. I think I got to go Jaguar.
So it's Jaguars versus just a brown cat?
Mountain lion. Otherwise,
I mean, I guess if the mountain lion has a shiny coat, that's like pretty cool, but the Jaguars are prettier.
They don't really. Mountain lions are just like tawny.
But in a world where they have a shiny coat, I'd probably take that. But generally they don't, which is why I'm going with Jaguar.
Tough but fair.
Jaguar.
The
Jaguars fans don't like it when you say Jaguar.
I know. I think it's weird too. We talked about this, and Chap says it too, but I left it alone.
Wait, Chap says Jaguar?
He says Jaguar.
Oh, see? Look at that.
That's weird. Lastly, ZenCupid at ZenDBP writes in, what are your current video game addictions or new game that you are looking forward to the most?
Oh, man. Last of Us 2. Holy crap. I'm definitely looking forward to that. Currently playing Fire Emblem on the 3DS because my girlfriend got herself a 3DS for Christmas so that she could play Pokemon Sun. I'm going to play Pokemon Moon when someone gives that to me for Christmas. Presumably Urshad? I don't know. I think Chelsea told my brother to get Pokemon Moon. I don't know.
Is she your gift whisperer? Does she like go around to people who wouldn't know what kind of like technology gifts to get you and just like be like, here, get this?
Urshad is like trash at giving gifts, so I think only to him. But luckily, he doesn't listen to this podcast.
I think he like studiously avoids coming into contact with any of your work, which I think is a little strange, but you know.
Well, he's like an anti-fan.
He's got he's got a poodle to take care of, and
that's true. Oh yeah, we're giving him. I can just tell. He's not listening. I can just tell everybody what I'm getting him. We're getting the poodle a gift, and that'll operate as a gift for both him and his partner.
Now that is some expert level gift giving strategy for the gift giver on a budget. Just give something to the dog and say it's for the whole family. That's great. So Last of Us 2 and Pokemon Moon are going to be your. That's what I'm looking forward to. Currently, I'm playing this app game. It's essentially a Facebook game, but on my phone that I'm kind of addicted to. Actually, this is how bad I am. I actually spend money on it. Ah, you fool!
Right? I'm an asshole. I hate it. I can't believe it's just like but it's only $5.
But they design all these games to like once you get into it.
Yeah,
like, once you discover
I know.
That
there's
it's fun,
there's like cognitive science going into these games about how they can get you port you with your money.
I can spend there's a pretty good Civ clone on iPad that I've been trying to play, but I refuse to spend money on mobile games. And the amount of time it takes to save up enough points to advance one technology is so ridiculous that I would have to just carry the iPad with me everywhere, turn it on once an hour, collect my point, and then put it back down for days. Like setting an alarm while I'm sleeping to wake up, collect my point, and go back to bed. And there's there's no way. The game is extremely
Let me
deep.
say this. I don't think there's a problem with spending money on a mobile game if it's just the upfront, it's a $3.99 mobile game, you download it, that's it. The problem is the in-game, which is what you're talking about, the in-game spending.
It's just a steady drip. And this game, I'm in the Bronze Age right now, and it goes all the way to the postmodern era. And I'm already at a point this. There is no way they're getting any more of my money or time. And so just all these farming games, I threw it down in disgust. But you found one that you rather enjoy.
I enjoy it a lot. It is... I don't think it's pay to win. So there's... And it's not a solid line. There's a fuzzy distinction between whether or not players who play for free can do a pretty good job. But I think players who play for free in this game can do it. It's Magic Rush Heroes. They have an enormous advertising budget. If you play literally any other app game, you've probably seen an advertisement for them. I enjoy it. The reason I ended up getting it, and it was free to download because that's how these games work, is because there were not very many good tower defense games. So those are my favorite kind of throw away whatever, waste your time in the office, even though I don't have an office. But those are my favorite kinds of those kinds of games, time wasters. And there's just not that many good tower defense games. And usually when you beat them, it doesn't do much for you. I know that there's a really good tower defense game online that they've ported to mobile, but I don't like the mobile version. Kingdom Rush is supposed to be pretty good. And I've played it online, and that one's really fun. But this one was advertised to me as a tower defense game. So I downloaded it, and it really isn't. And I was pissed about that, but I played it. I really enjoy it now. So they tricked me, but it's fine. Non-mobile games besides The Last of Us and Pokemon that I'm looking forward to. I went through Uncharted 4. That is the only good Uncharted game. I'm surprised it got a sequel after the first Uncharted game. But it sounds like they're going to be doing an Uncharted, not 5, because that'd be weird, but a spin-off involving 2 of the characters from the Uncharted series, so that might be fun. I really like these games that have a really good story, so that's the reason I like The Last of Us. Although the story for The Last of Us is okay, it's the execution of the story that's just friggin' amazing. But I'm looking forward to that. I don't know, other games... I don't know, there's a lot of other games I'm thinking about right now, but I haven't really there hasn't been a good Western RPG in a while.
Are they making another sequel to Red Dead Redemption?
Meh. That's a really good story, but I'm pretty meh on it overall. A lot of people love it a lot, and I think they're probably right. It's just not for me.
Yeah, I tried. I played Red Dead Revolver and Red Dead Redemption, and I just didn't like them as much as Fallout. Which, I'm still stuck on Fallout 4. I got the deluxe edition when it first came out, and I still haven't even installed any of the DLC, which gives you a clue as to how much time I spend playing video games. Which,
I don't like Fallout 4 that much.
Really?
It's maybe if it didn't have the word Fallout in front of it, like if it was just a different franchise of game, I'd be like, this is pretty good. But Fallout New Vegas was so good that I just got disappointed by Fallout 4.
See, I like Fallout 3 better than New Vegas.
That's because you're a monster.
Whoa. All right.
What?
That response had a disturbing lack of proportionality.
Fallout 3 was good too. I think Fallout 4 is not as good as Fallout 3.
So Fallout 4 to me seems like infinite. I mean, I can spend my entire life building settlements if I want. Clearing wood and building stuff and finding settlers.
Yeah, I like that. I think the story for Fallout 4 makes no sense, and it's not very good, and it's not well told. It makes no sense.
Gotta agree with you. And that's been the thing that's like deterred me from pursuing the main quest very far, is that the story is just like kind of whatever. I mean, the middle of the story for New Vegas I thought kind of fell apart, but then came together really well at the end. But I think Fallout 3, once they released the Broken Steel DLC that broke the level cap and let you keep playing the main quest after it suddenly ends without really any warning, then Fallout 3 has just enough to kind of like keep you moving forward and lead you onward. Although I will say I really want to finish the main quest for Fallout 4 because they make allusions in 3 and New Vegas to the Commonwealth and to like replicants, and I really want to see how that story ends. But I may never get there because I just don't play that many video games. If there were 2 that I was going to play that I would be very excited for, it would be Overwatch for console, which I know is not brand new, and Civilization 6, of course, for computer. I've played more hours of all the Civ games combined than any other.
I haven't actually played Civ 6 yet. I loved Civ 5 much more than Civ 4.
Oh, Civ 5 was... Okay, so again, when it first came out, Civ 5, lame. But once the expansion packs came out and, they had like a better implementation of culture and religion and a better implementation of like battle AI, it was amazing. And so I
still think Civ 3 is the best of the Civs. A lot of people disagree with me.
Ooh, we could do a whole podcast about that. But we won't right now. Don't worry, everyone. Don't turn off your podcatchers just yet. But
the guy he wrote in, he's like, thanks for the 2-ish hours. And it's like, I don't think we're going to hit 2 hours for this podcast. Yeah, we found it.
Yeah, we'll get there. We always find a way. But no, like I feel like Civ 6 will probably be even better once it has an update or 2. But the chances that I will be able to just like plop down and play Civ for like 7 or 8 hours straight, as I have done with every previous Civ game, are growing slimmer in my old age. Partly because I just can't sit that long, any more than like
that makes sense.
2.5 hours and my legs fall asleep, and then I
stopped playing Civ 5 because I couldn't write. Like it was just like, oh, now I can't do my job. Wow,
it's true. Civ is a dangerous game to play. It's very like you talk about being addicted to video games. I think Civ is the closest I have come to actually having it like impact my ability to live the rest of my life.
I think in February I'll start playing Civ 6. I think that's the time I can give myself.
Yeah,
also Overwatch is fun. I hope they implement a story at some point.
See, I'm not convinced that games need a story, because the one game that I do play a lot of, partly just because it's convenient and partly because it's like super engaging, Heroes of Order and Chaos, which is basically like a League of Legends or like a Dota 2 clone for mobile. And I play it on the iPad, and it's big enough where I can actually get my little guy to run where I want him to and attack where I want him to, instead of wasting my ultimate on a minion or whatever. But
so I don't think games necessarily need a story, and I've been watching a lot of League of Legends. I haven't played it. Watching a lot of League of Legends tournament play while I'm writing, because it's really easy to pass the time, and the people broadcasting the game have gotten better. Like, I remember when StarCraft was like really big in the multiplayer scene, the broadcasters were friggin' terrible. They've gotten better. Also, League of Legends broadcasters have gotten better. So I've been watching a lot of that. I don't think all games need a story. I don't even think that like arena games like Overwatch necessarily need a story, but the world that they've developed is so rich that it almost demands a story. Like, yeah, so it's not like Unreal Tournament. You need a story. Like, you don't. But Overwatch is just they've got incredible backstories for characters. They've got incredible worlds built for the game that it's almost like, how is there not like, why did you build this world? It doesn't even matter. There's no story.
Sequels and movies, dude.
Well, that's the thing. Like, Blizzard has its own movie studio, and even though the Warcraft movie sucked, I think it printed money.
Well, that's just what Blizzard does. I mean, when they design a world, they go all out. I mean, even
they do. That's like embedded in the company's DNA.
Like the Dota 2 world is based on like the Warcraft world. It's and they were able to cheat and import that whole like rich history of Azeroth or whatever. And Heroes has none of that, which is fine. It's still a super fun game. I just progressed to the point where I can start playing ranked matches, which is extremely frustrating. I do not have the lust for competition that I once did. But as far as unranked matches go, it's a great way to kill 25 minutes while you're waiting for your cookies to finish baking or whatever. And that is a game that I've been playing for probably 2 years that appears to have endless replay value.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So the thing about League of Legends is that and again, I don't play it, I just watch it. I imagine playing would be very frustrating because I'm very used to watching really high level play. And I obviously don't know anything near close enough to the game to even get into entry level play and play well right away. But B, it's very clear that communication is very important. And I do not want to do that. I don't want to communicate with the assholes who play League of Legends. Are you kidding me? No.
Well, you can, I mean, at an unranked level, you can get away with, gentle admonishments to your teammates who are doing stupid things, like lining up in the wrong lane, or like a support character not supporting and like going off by themselves instead. You try to keep your team relatively in line, and you can oftentimes just do that by putting map markers down, like, hey, I need help, or go this way, retard, or whatever. Not necessarily in those words. You know how kids talk when they game. But what will guarantee a loss is if you have one or two players that have connection issues, because then you're playing one player down, which doesn't happen in these big tournaments. Which to play on a LAN, how wonderful. But that, or when communication breaks down, and your team spends all its time like sniping at each other, like typing in the chat instead of playing the stupid game. Like arguing over who sucks more when you're not like farming or attacking or anything, and they're just like out there like hunting your team one by one. That is a recipe for catastrophe. So I would say that communication is important, but not as important as preventing total breakdown. Like I've definitely had games that we've won in total silence, but I don't think I've ever won a game where my team just breaks down and starts like yelling at each other in the chat.
I mean, okay, that's fair. I'm still probably not going to play it, but
I would suggest trying the mobile version. The desktop versions are more complicated, and
there's a mobile version of a MOBA. That sounds awful.
Or no, the mobile version of League of Legends or Dota, like Heroes of Order and Chaos. I would recommend picking that one up because the character development trees are a lot smaller. There aren't as many, items and, modular things about your player. And you can play with pretty much any of the free characters they give you in the course of a week. And if you stick with it for a couple of months, you will have played through the entire character list. So if you really need a game to get addicted to, that would be my suggestion. Well,
all right. I think that's the end of the podcast, right?
Yeah, I think that'll about do it for this episode on Norse Code. Is there anything you would like to tease? Anything you've got coming down the pike that we can look forward to as readers of your work?
I'm going to do a goal line breakdown. I've already got a couple of pieces up at Cold Omaha. One is a player review of the Jaguars game, where I go over essentially every player. Some in a little more detail than others, as these tend to go. And then I'll probably have... So Matthew Collard does a piece at 1500 every week about the player to watch for. Then I do a response piece the day after about how to take down that player, or how to attack that player, or how to obviate that player from play. So those are something you should look forward to. Probably have another piece of Cold Omaha. I don't know.
Well, all right. You can follow Arif on Twitter if you would like to read some lukewarm takes about pizza at Arif Hassan NFL. You can follow the show at Norse Code DN, a feed that is curated by our intrepid producer, James Bogachnik, whom you can follow at Big Mono. I, of course, am at Dusty O'Connell on Twitter. And you can find Norse Code at dailynorseman.com, alongside some of Arif's work and other podcasts and Vikings news, and the entire Norse Code episode archive, which can also be found at norsecodepodcast.com. Episodes, show notes, links to our Facebook page, facebook.com/dailynorseman, our Twitter page, and our YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to if you would like instant updates whenever new episodes drop. Otherwise, we, of course, are available on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, although I've been, ever since the latest Stitcher update came out, I've been having a lot of issues with their servers, so maybe steer clear of that one. But wherever fine podcasts are aggregated, you will find the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, Norse Code. We will return, I guess later this week for a preview episode. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. Maybe we'll record on Thursday, release on Friday. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds like a winner.
All right.
Hopefully the Vikings will be a winner against Indianapolis, and we will have all the details on the next episode of Norse Code. But until then, spoons out. We'll see you later this week. Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.